going to make some money. And so people invested in FTX thinking that this is going to be a safe platform. This kid is smarter than everyone else. Most of this $10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, sort of information about that. He says, "Hey, we're actually with just put a bunch of garlic cloves in the pot." I still remember our house reeked. She would put 60 cloves of garlic in in a stew. Lack of regulation and the ability to send peer to peer, which means you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman. There's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams, and it's sort of what's left after the guy who kind of was spearheading this bill was a fraud. It's kind of tough. I was actually randomly some was going to undo sort of everything. If you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're Easy on Twitter, I probably butchered his name, but he was actually originally sort of an ally of Sam. So he invested in FTX early on, put $100 million in, so we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent, get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big he was the most notorious and well-respected. As a Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business and business is good.
Whoa. And what did he say to that? I really enjoyed you catching him on Twitter Spaces. I really enjoyed that. I listened to that whole thing because before that, you have this guy who's this,
appreciate your transparency, kind of kissing up a little bit. But I was just somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter Space interactions with him, and he kept getting away with the fact that senator's office reached out to me. They're like, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know, man. You guys have to – this is y'all's thing to figure out. Ultimately, y'all – right? The inflation rate, I think, is 75% or something like that. It's an unimaginable – it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time. I'm blanking on the name right now. But
A1Z? What is that?
No. I'm sorry. I'm blanking on – it's this famous – I'm going to remember it right after I get out of here. It's one of the famous the person's not named in the report who is donating to Democrats. We know the one donating to Republicans was Ryan Salami. But that person eventually these exchanges where it was worth more. So he was arbitraging this difference in prices. And then after he made his money that way, he just kind of grifting here. And so, but you'd see him in nice cars. And so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm I get fed a bunch of, he launches Alameda Research first, which is just this trading firm, which basically the idea here is we have some ideas. We're going to raise a little bit of money and we're going to, he was, really well regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the returns were insane. But abilities, it's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's what
said, well, hey, can we restructure all this money that went through me like a loan so that we can, say that I took a loan out and I was donating so we didn't violate any laws. They never ended up doing that. This is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you the house always wins, right? So when FTX was taking off, it just seemed like everyone who was someone was backing him. So then it was okay. And then I think a lot of these people deferred.
Gotten away with it?
So many of these scams are these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources.
And a lot of ums and ahs, and you just kept on them. It was amazing that first of all, it was amazing that he felt like he could
to expose, but I'm interested in the characters who perpetuate fraud because they're such interesting psychological case studies. Sam Bankman-Fried, you could probably write a whole book about you can't do that and then say, oops, I played a little too much of my video games and lost billions of dollars. This doesn't fly.
Well, he wasn't saying that I played the video games and that's why I lost the money.
But you think you have this backstop because on the books it's worth, X dollars. Let's say it's like worth $5 a coin. But what you're not realizing is the real risk is when FTX can't pay you back, they probably can't pay anyone back. I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was like, I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of a bottom line for ExxonMobil or any $10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet?
And sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this what was the first video?
I started as sort of like an interview show, nothing about scams. I had a channel before it. They wanted to store some Bitcoin with Tom Brady. They wanted to be alongside Tom Brady. So he's like, there was fungibility between wallets. And she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like, this ain't going to fly. You have to, ultimately get the surgery. Outright, the proceeds of criminals. I mean, we know that these criminals do launder their money through a lot of these crypto exchanges, through mixers. It's just sort of Elizabeth Warren wrote a letter to them. They're being looked at much more closely. I mean, ultimately, all of these things are so opaque in the sense that somebody found out about this God mode. And so the lawyer's like, how do we basically cover this up? Dan Friedberg's like, how do we, what do you want me to do? And he's like, hey, of what's going on. Now he's still like trying to say he did nothing wrong. He maintains he's innocent. And right now, actually, the big like kind of scam. And why is so much of your balance sheet made up of your own tokens? It's a big question. So one of the things that FTX had done, and a lot of companies were doing at the time, actually his whole technique of shifting the blame like onto Alameda and like, I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore. What he said in one of the interviews, he goes, no one believes me when I said I donated dark because no one believes anyone would be like, everyone wants the credit for donating. No one believes that I just do it on the sly. FTX said in their terms of service. So one of the really big problems was they actually weren't doing that, but nobody knew because nobody had to look at their books. Like it was very opaque. Really, everyone got to look at it all at once in one place. And people noticed, like, wait a second. A lot of their assets are just their own tokens. Like they had a Serum token, which they controlled most of, A1Z, A16Z. It was one of those, Sequoia or A16Z. One of them wrote this glowing review of Sam, basically saying he's going to be one of the first trillionaires. So everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So the handle now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deeply Sam goes, oh, you won like our battle. And people were like, is it a battle when you lose billions of dollars of customers?
Do something like that. Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me as well as I think it's an important thing.
Easier or more profitable for him. Mm-hmm. Like, why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot. Really know what I was looking at the time. Then I go to college, and all my friends get an MLMs, multi-level marketing, sort of like just like the like, hey, you're going to get rich. So I was always getting invited to these like get rich seminars. Don't invest. Like, that's a bad idea.
People were calling bullshit, though. Just like they were calling, there was a few people that were wary that were calling bullshit on Bernie Madoff, and there was a few people. So when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? How does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this? Regulated, like if he was doing this, like Coinbase can't do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, Coinbase is much more heavily scrutinized. They actually have to file with the SEC. But even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit, like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no, you have Dogecoin, you have SafeMoon, you have FTT, which is what FTX was using as their native token. So a lot of these guys, you'll start a crypto exchange, and it just was kind of, I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to like, even before that, I had done a show where I was like trying to break down these topics. I was like, I just wasn't interested. I was like, that's not my life. So I always wanted to sort of, have a voice. And so I started a YouTube channel just doing random videos that really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange. We don't know. I mean, there's only a few that are bigger. Like there's Binance, very opaque company. We don't exactly know.
And what has happened to Binance since FTX went?
They kind of shut down. Myself and some other people were saying, like, we think they're insolvent because we had taken a look at their numbers and we said, there's no way they have the money for this. They don't have the token.
Views about what? Like you didn't start doing this. You started doing just like a normal interview show?
I was just doing a normal interview show with a few of my buddies and wanted to basically influence politics by just donating. And the idea is you donate to both sides, you can never lose, right?
Yeah.
If you have is buying both, lying about it so that you can get all the good press of like caring about all these social issues while also not caring at all. It's a strange time, man, to be covering crypto, because I tried to tell people for years that this scam problem, this fraud problem, located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your...
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States, I mean, so it's like things are good for now. Yeah.
You don't know.
That was the problem with the FTX. Like, they had hidden all their numbers. Like, Sam had, right? It's all at some address. And so people were asking, like, you say you have all this Bitcoin, where's the Bitcoin? You say you have all this Ethereum, where's the Ethereum?
And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. Like, the more I studied some reactions, but not much, what I noticed is it resonated with people beyond the views, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like, I was just like, there was something different about the reaction to it. Like, and, Vic's the son of Harvard lawyers. We just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out all these other guys buy into him.
Right.
And then they themselves are kind of also looking at each other being like, well, that guy did it. Like, what? It's the hottest deal or system to where they could see you, Joe, deposit a Bitcoin on FTX. They could grab that Bitcoin and start trading with it immediately.
Wow.
Even though they were never supposed to be able to.
Down. Because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably. Yeah. Analogy for losing your house.
You know what's funny? Yeah.
I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say if you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like, CZ has connections to China. Like, maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here. Maybe that's a big deal. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like people get away with it. It's just there's too many people doing it. And you'll catch some people, but ultimately a lot of people will just basically skate by, even though by all rights they should have been.
How does a guy like that not wind up getting indicted?
I ask myself that every day. There's so many.
Is it a matter of time, or is it
So CZ says, "Hey, maybe they don't have the money. I don't know. Whatever. I'm just going to sell like $2 billion worth."
But he knew what he was doing.
Oh, for sure. He's a shark. You're the CEO as of 2020. He hands it to this a girl he actually had a relationship with, Caroline Ellison, right? And she supposedly controlled it. He said she did his wire transfer, and it's kind of expensive to do these. Like, you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take like her and I believe Gary Wang were big executives. They're cooperating. They pled guilty. They're cooperating with the feds. I mean, they did this around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in. So you kind of think you're swimming safely with like other savvy investors. And that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar. So before, it's like if I send you $1 and then you send that dollar on, we can easily trace that back to me, right? It's like here, here. But if I send $1 to you and everyone's sending you $1, and then you're sending $1 to all
regulators when he was trying to impose regulations or encourage regulations, how could that have benefited him as opposed to Binance? Like what could they have possibly done to make it easy?
Found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You know, you could do it yourself, Joe. You could do it. But what? It's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your success. And ultimately, one of the ways, like even some of the candidates they donated to were through like a third employee we didn't even know about. And they were like donating through them for like all these, I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, you know, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, you know, I used to fail, but by these little tricks, I feel middleman because there's no one who controls like Bitcoin. Like no one can say like no to a transaction. Now it's like there's nothing to stop you from sending that money. And then you do like if you're Alameda Research and you're funneling money through a personal investor, that I think is the problem. There or, you know, something like Europe or something like that is you are subject to all these regulations which require you to be a little more careful.
Oh, those are pesky.
Yeah, which thankfully she did, and she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense. But I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, you know, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. Reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety. It's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to. We're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically like they call them straw donors because it's like if I give money to you to give your hands in both pockets. But publicly, he's just like he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm like this, like, you know, I care about all these issues.
Yeah.
But it's like even more cynical than just buying one party. Washington. And I think there was like a tweet from Sam saying like, oh, like I'll see you the next time you're in Washington or something like that. But like it was kind of a dig because he knows CZ can't go to Washington. Like he would be lateral like dollars or like some asset. We'll give you FTT tokens, which is their own invented coin. And that should have value if anything goes wrong. And people were accepting that as value. But yeah, tokens like is the individual, you can think of currency, right? So it's like the individual. So Bitcoin is, you have Bitcoin. Then you have, it's one of the cryptocurrencies. You have Ethereum. Like you have $1, I'll let you trade with $100. And that's going to be like one reason you come to my offshore exchange. I can offer you more leverage than the guys who are like, you know, you're like, it's this magic internet money.
Magic.
How do you get some of that? How do you get some of that magic internet money? Well, you have to go somewhere to buy it. And so it's a crypto exchange is where you kind of go. You put your fiat. Friedberg, shady. This guy
allegedly shady.
Dan Friedberg. No, he's definitely shady. I'll say that. This guy.
What was his? I remember, but what was his?
Nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. So even though they said like we're not going to touch your money, as soon as you deposited Bitcoin, I mean, I talked to some of the insiders at Alameda. They said they had this back door. I saw all this, and my experiences up to that point, it kind of led me to like, I want to say something, but why is nobody saying anything? It just seemed like there was this, you know, these people pitching this stuff, and nobody was talking about it. So I made this random video. Just they have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us, we're not going to touch it, we're not going to move it. That's what FTX shocking thing. And I think that shows like if you're running a shady empire, like who's better than a shady lawyer to try to help you cover it up, right?
How did you get in?
They bring on people like Tom Brady to promote it, Larry David in the Super Bowl. They kind of get buy-in from all these big sort of names and also he'd be afraid of being indicted, or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal with money system. I mean, yeah, especially in our modern age, I mean, it seems like you can understand where they're coming from, the average person. Gay, so like, can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it? Like,
No, basically they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So, hey, you're going to be the guy. Like when you withdraw, there's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address because you send it to a different one. Fine, but FTX was sort of the worst offender. Is let's say I give you a loan, Joe. So an unsecured loan would be I give you $1 million and I don't ask for anything. I kept making the videos and ultimately they never did, but I start doing that, and after I cover get rich quick schemes for a while, act that bill, and now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it. Very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time I watched her as she's like gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer is inevitable. So something to understand. FTX was insolvent long before it was realized that they were insolvent. Right? So that literally had a $10 billion account that he mislabeled with Alameda Research.
Mislabeled?
Yeah, it wasn't like he was some random fly-by-night guy. He was well respected in the Wall Street space. People thought he might take over the SEC after like the current person had stepped down. They thought he was going to take it over like 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I don't want to give off the idea that like there's nothing here. But the problem is that it's sort of like hard. You kind of have to disprove every single, like there's always a new like health guy telling you that there's some new alternative discovery, whatever. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, why do they lied my way into it? I can sort of lie my way out of it. And this is what he did. So prior to this, I'd interviewed him twice before, and I had kind of gotten hamstrung with like, you know, he's just so good at dodging stuff. Smart thing, which is something like this happens, you shut up. You don't say anything.
Right.
And then you point at your boss. I mean, that's basically what they did.
Oof.
Which they for sure did stuff wrong. To the terms of service, they said results may vary. What's that about? I mean, ultimately, it's like, and so I realized like, oh, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology, and it's this guy who drives a Toyota. So you go like, well, why does he need to scam me if he's driving a Toyota, right? Then it's like, which Sam Bankman-Fried did. Then it's like, okay, never understood how Bernie Madoff got people because it seems so preposterous. And then I fell for something very similar. And what I noticed with all of these things, the thread is, give you this yield. He starts explaining like this thing that sounds exactly like a Ponzi scheme. And so ultimately, Matt Levine's like, yeah, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. But again, it stopped short. His whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet. And he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called, so they were paying everybody to promote this FTX crypto exchange. And the idea is this is the next big thing, right? And this is where you're going to make money. Now they're like, hey, don't work a 9-to-5 job. Like, be free like me. And I'm like, you're here on a Sunday at like 5 p.m. How free are you really? Like, you're just like, so if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now, he's a shark. He knows what he's doing.
What was the conflict between the two of them that led him to do that?
The conflict was, it's a great question. The conflict was ultimately that Sam was trying to get some regulations passed. And
bizarre that so many people got duped. And I felt the same way about Bernie Madoff. You know, I'm not a financially aware person. I'm not into the market. I don't follow these things.
Might be one of the first, like, trillionaires or whatever, like he's such a great entrepreneur. They think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys. Or a lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the like most fair case you could make about people, the account fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured. That's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into is you believe, it's kind of too good to be true, but the social proof is overwhelming. and it overwhelms your kind of like alarm bells. So the social proof is a combination of things. So first of all, it's like a guy who enabled God, or who helped cover up God mode. And he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other, people, or it's just like.
Well, how does he skate on that? Like how
FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
To their other friends, they're all saying it's okay. Let me put money in. And it's just a huge case study that just because other people, very strange. And these offshore entities were also using like U.S. branches. Like there's FTX US, which was like more regulated, but not really that regulated. It's, there were some margin trading accounts. And I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you. And all they wanted, not having sort of like, it's maybe not big enough. They're good people, a lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding, make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had this thing. So all this money's going in, and then you basically wait. And as you're waiting, Ethereum's going out everywhere. A bunch of people are withdrawing, right? Because they're also taking their money out.
Right.
By the time FTX's influence went from the Bahamas reaching into the United States, well, technically not really being regulated by the United States.
Yeah, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party. Each other on amphetamines and making billions of dollars. Like, it sounds like a great story if it wasn't illegitimate.
Yeah, ultimately that's the problem. Like, Sam was just hopped up on amphetamine.
Crypto.
Ransomware, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. Because before, it was like, okay, you need to use like Western Union or sort of one of these places where you can kind of send money without too much screw company, so they have to report everything. So if you're offshore, you can kind of not do any of that. You can play fast and loose. And, for some people, they think that's better. They can offer, let's say, like 100x leverage. Coinbase, it seems like they're, legitimate. But so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like.
Don't really understand what's going, like the FTX thing, for example, is the best one, because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, what is happening? Like, what are they doing? Try to break it down for us. Like, first of all,
TT. So it looks like, if you just look at their assets, it looks like they're covering their liabilities. They owe customers $10 billion. Looks like they have $10 billion, but like they're setting it up with like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke. Right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like, now if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank.
Involved in what you do.
It's a weird thing.
So when did you start your YouTube channel?
So I started it a few years ago, 2018, 2019, everything. I don't have access to the book. Like, I basically knew nothing. So anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, where's the money? He goes, well, I don't know. It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda.
People that were standing out and saying, none of this makes sense.
Right.
And who were those people?
So there were a few people. So he decides to donate dark to a Republican, to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his there's no Ethereum left. There's no Bitcoin left. You don't have the real tokens anymore. You just have your sort of nonsense FTT tokens, the tokens you invented. And he said, success, 2 months. You're going to be making 5 figures a month, 10 months, maybe 6 figures a month. And I've done it for people before. That's the social proof. I've shown people how to do this. They're like, look, I've been